What is going on, geeks? Noah Jai from the Geek Week here, and today we've got a special video to do because we're going to be covering something that is very near and dear to my heart, and that, of course, is the masterpiece and brainchild of Jackson Publick and Doc Hammer, The Venture Brothers. Now, this is a video series that I've long since wanted to do. Not only is The Venture Brothers one of my favorite shows of all time, but after covering and reviewing Radiant is the Blood of the Baboon Heart, and subsequently realizing that we may never get another new episode of Venture Brothers again, it dawned on me how underrated the show really is. I mean, I was surprised at how little advertising the film got before it came out, but I was even more surprised at how few people were aware when it actually did come out. Now, to my defense, it's difficult sometimes to see something as a cult classic when you are very much in the cult. To me, Venture Brothers is just a classic, but this video, and possibly video series, will be geared towards exposing some people who maybe haven't heard of it, or have and just didn't really give it a chance. Earlier, I referred to the show as the brainchild of Jackson Publick and Doc Hammer, and that was because, quite frankly, it's seldom you see animated shows where the creators do almost everything in pre-production, including but not limited to writing, directing, and even a good majority of the voice acting. This show is absolutely precious to the two men who created it, and that goes double for me. Now, in this video series, I'll be breaking down the Venture Bros season by season and briefly covering each episode within. My goal outside of reminiscing about the show to people who love it as much as I do will be to attract people who have never seen the show and hopefully encourage them to go check it out for themselves. And though the series did technically come to an end after the film, us dedicated fans know all too well there's plenty more story to be told. Hey, fingers crossed. Hey, who knows? Maybe we'll get some more Venture Brothers in the future. I mean, that's a super Hakeem Olajuwon reach, but I hope so. Now, in our video today, we will be going through and covering Season 1 of The Venture Brothers. And please, if you guys enjoy the idea and would like to see a complete series, get in the comments, let me know. Also, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Let's get into what we came here for. Let's dive in to Season 1 of The Venture Brothers.
Can't you hear the wind calling? Little Miss can't be wrong. We're free. We are the future. Look, watch this.
Now, the dynamic between the central characters in the show will be easier to understand for those acquainted with the classic cartoon Jonny Quest, as the main characters are, let's say loosely, spoofed off the Adventure Crew. Though it should be noted, a more literal representation of Jonny Quest does exist within this universe, going by Action Johnny, a recovering drug addict traumatized by his life as a child adventurer. But we'll get there soon enough. And Jonny Quest isn't the only one being spoofed. As you'll see, a number of comic book superheroes and supervillains, and then some, get the same exact treatment throughout the series. Now, the primary characters consist of the Jonny Quest of the group, all grown up, Dr. Thaddeus Rusty Venture, a former boy adventurer and the inspiration for the Rusty Venture cartoon series. These days, though Rusty refers to himself as a doctor, that isn't quite the truth, as he runs what remains of his father's once leading global corporation directly into the ground. His father being the super scientist and super successful adventurer Jonas Venture, and Rusty has been living in the shadow of his father ever since he was born. Next, there's the titular characters, or so we're led to believe, the fraternal twins Hank and Dean, the Venture Brothers. Yes, believe it or not, Rusty Venture has children, which after the first few episodes I'm sure will surprise you very much. And last but not least, we have the long-standing Venture family bodyguard, Brock Sampson, who was appointed to protect the Ventures by the Office of Secret Intelligence. Now, Brock is an all-around badass. Some have described him as a Swiss murder machine. He may be a slight bit sadistic, but as Rusty would put it, he's just being thorough. Naturally, the first episode we'll be going over is the pilot titled The Terrible Secret of Turtle Bay, which aired originally on February 16, 2003, and was written by Jackson Publick. In this episode, Rusty is planning to present an invention of his to the United Nations. All the while, the representative of Japan, Otaku Senzuri, is trying to steal it from him, while dressed up as a ninja. Yeah. Outside of the general character establishments and introductions like I gave earlier, we also find out through a conversation between Hank and Dean that the boys do not have a mother. And also, of course, how could we forget, we are introduced to the Mighty Monarch, and his minions. The Monarch is a mediocre supervillain dressed as a butterfly, and Dr. Venture's self-proclaimed nemesis. It was honestly impressive how many prominent characters, though unnamed at this point, made appearances in the pilot. I mean, Billy Quizboy, Pete White, even Richard Impossible was there, so all of these ideas were established well before the first episode ever aired, and they would all become prominent characters throughout the series. Anywho, speaking of the United Nations Convention, Rusty's invention was rejected, and we learn why Otaku was after it in the first place. Rusty brought a literal death ray to a convention of peace between nations. It isn't all bad though, since Zuru ends up being caught and arrested, and the US Army offers to buy 100 death ray, or more specifically, U-rays from Rusty. Really, outside of the art style, which would become more cemented in the first episode, a lot of the staples were set in place from the very beginning. The humor, the character writing, and the one course I think the show just does better than most American animated shows that have ever come out, and that's the world building, and that was all pretty much there from the beginning. Alright, but the first season would officially begin on August 7, 2004, with the episode being titled Dia de los Dangerous and written by Jackson Public. As the episode begins, Rusty is teaching a class in Tijuana, and at that point we get another layer of his character. Well, so to speak. Rusty has a bit of a drug problem, we'll call it, as we see him try to bribe a Tijuanan doctor for narcotics. Sadly for Rusty, while he's under the anesthetics the doctor gave him, he instead has his kidney stolen by the very same doctor, and upon waking up, is barely clinging to life. At this point, we are introduced to Helper, and that is an acronym for Humanoid Electric Lab Partner Robot, a machine created by Rusty's father to help around the house and in the lab, but we'd later find out Helper's done so much more. For the time being, Rusty is using Helper as life support until he can find a suitable donor with a kidney to spare. In the meantime, the previously mentioned self-proclaimed arch-nemesis of Rusty, the Mighty Monarch, is planning to kidnap his twin boys Hank and Dean. The honor of this great task is bestowed upon the henchman called Speedy, as it will prove was a rite of passage for him to earn his wings. Shockingly, Speedy and the minions are able to not only kidnap the twins, but also subdue Brock Samson with tranquilizer darts. Young Speedy got caught in Brock's grasp before he was able to subdue him, and well, it's known as death by Samson. Believing him to be dead, the surviving minions would bury Brock and report back to the Monarch. At which point we're formally introduced to the Monarch supervillain sidekick / girlfriend, appropriately named Dr. Girlfriend, who, despite her voice, I assure you is all woman. We also learn a little bit more about the Monarch himself, as he describes to the kidnapped twins what he has dubbed the Summer of the Monarch. So the Monarch's ridiculous origin story didn't really start out that ridiculous. Sadly, his parents were tragically killed in a plane crash. As a newly orphaned child alone in the cold world, it was only natural that the boy would then be raised by a butterfly, which is actually why he's coincidentally in Tijuana at the same time as the Ventures. You see, the Monarch butterflies relocate to Tijuana in the summer, and the Monarch is there to find his adoptive parents, who of course are dead because they're butterflies. Rusty and Helper are able to locate Brock's grave, and the massive murder machine rises from the dead. The trio are able to rescue the boys from the Monarch, if you want to call it that, only to find out that Rusty has not only taken a kidney from one of them, but one from each of them. Now, like I said, at this point we're starting to see the art style take the form that we're used to, and also we get to see the start of some downright wonderful character writing and world building that would later shape the series. Season 1, Episode 2 is titled Careers in Science, and it's written by Doc Hammer. The episode originally aired on August 14, 2004. As the episode opens, we are formally introduced to Rusty's previously mentioned super scientist father, Jonas Venture. And though he's been dead for 20 years, he still serves as the greatest source of trauma in Rusty's life. We are introduced through an old video of Jonas showing off his newly built space station, the Gargantua 1. In the current day, Rusty has been summoned to the Gargantua 1 by its inhabitants, Colonel Bud Manstrong and his love interest, Anna. They called Rusty because a problem light is turned on in the station, and by that I do mean a machine with the word problem on it and a red light above it has turned on, which is made even better when we learn about this specific device in the episodes that come, but for now, the problem light is on and Rusty has to figure out why. which of course he cannot, because Rusty is, well, Rusty. And no pun intended. All the while, Colonel Bud Manstrong tells Hank and Dean a scary story about the crew that was originally on the Gargantua 1. He tells them that a crew member went insane during movie night, a playing of Burt Reynolds' Sharky's Machine. The crew member would open the bay doors, sending everyone that was watching on board to die in space. While Rusty was still trying to figure out the cause of the problem light, he accidentally bumped his head and starts to hallucinate. In his hallucination, he sees his father, and it should be noted, even in his dreams, he visualizes his father as a giant hovering over him. But shortly after talking to his father a bit, he comes to the realization that it was a toy that he was playing with while his father was building the Gargantua 1 that dropped in the ship's circuitry, melting and corroding to it over the years. When Rusty removes the melted toy, the problem light turns back off. Now, one thing I didn't say was, in the meantime, Brock did have sex with Bud Manstrong's love interest, Anna, and, yeah, he didn't really take it well. Or as Colonel Bud Manstrong would say,
"That's because you already took it in the lab."
And ominously, upon leaving the station, the very same problem light would turn back on. And so much of this is just so prominent later on in the series, like the problem machine, the movie night massacre, and we even get our first glimpse into Rusty's complicated and traumatizing relationship with his father, Jonas. Moving on to Season 1, Episode 3, and it was written by Jackson Public and titled Home Insecurity. The episode originally aired on August 21st, 2004. As the episode begins, Brock is leaving for his annual camping trip, and we learn not only is he in the OSI, but he's also highly regarded as a legend. While on the trip, Brock would come across Steve Summers, a man made into a cyborg by the government after an accident. These days, Summers is currently on the run from the government because they expect him to reimburse him for the expensive android procedure. Oh yeah, and Steve is having sex with a Sasquatch. a Sasquatch that's a dude. That is all. Now, with Brock's absence, villains will waste no time attacking the Venture compound, so Rusty decides to build a defense robot, which Helper sees him doing and becomes jealous and leaves. The hunch was correct, as two opposing henchmen do attack the compound, but at the same time, which actually ends up working in Rusty's favor, as the two opposing henchmen end up fighting each other as the twins and Rusty escape to the safe room. Now, the henchmen belonging firstly to the previously mentioned Mighty Monarch, who seemingly has made it his life's mission to oppose Rusty for no reason whatsoever. The other henchman belonging to Baron Werner Unterbeit, the dictator of Unterland, who bears a grudge against Rusty for deforming his face, which is actually, perfectly reasonable. The two were lab partners in college, and I mean, that's a sacred bond, for crying out loud. Now, while locked in the safe room, Rusty's new defense robot turns on him and begins to attack him and the boys. Rusty explains to Hank and Dean that he hasn't programmed it to know the difference between them and the enemies, as Rusty is now forced to call Helper and apologize. And in the midst of all that nonsense, the henchmen on both sides actually end up coming together and joining forces. But luckily, just in the nick of time, Helper returns, and soon after, Brock comes back from his trip, and the compound is safe again. Now, throughout the episode, we really started to see just how incompetent Rusty is, and how defenseless they are without Helper and Brock. Also, we even get some solid character writing for Helper. And believe it or not, there's more to come. Season 1, Episode 4 was written by Jackson Public, and it was called The Incredible Mr. Brisby. The episode originally aired on August 28, 2004. As the episode opens, the Ventures are in their experimental jet, the X-1, on the way to Africa so Rusty can meet with the quadriplegic entertainment mogul, Roy Brisby, who is a very, very on-the-nose spoof of Walt Disney, the founder of Disney. Now, the reason Brisby asked Rusty to come meet with him is just your typical billionaire stuff, in that he wants Rusty to clone him so he can, live forever. Of course, Rusty is Rusty, and he's not even capable of creating such a machine, but it just so happens Brisby is aware of that, as he informs us he knows Rusty isn't actually a doctor of anything. It turns out Mr. Brisby was good friends with Rusty's father, Jonas, as Jonas was a huge part of building one of Mr. Brisby's older theme parks, all under the name, of course, Brisbyland, Disneyland, very on the nose. It was through his time spent with Jonas that Brisby discovered that Jonas was trying to perfect the cloning process. Yet again, something that will prove vital to the climax of this series. All the same, Rusty refuses to assist Mr. Brisby, and Brisby has his pet panda that he stole from David Bowie subdue Rusty while his bodyguard drugs and detains Brock. While at Brisbyland, Hank and Dean are kidnapped. Yes, that's a reoccurring theme. This time by a revolutionary group that is there fighting the Brisby Empire. The boys were easily brainwashed and brought to the side of the revolutionaries. Their only mission now is to kill the bee. Yeah, I should probably mention Brisbyland's theme is bees. Brock, after waking up from his drug-induced coma, is rescued by his longtime adversary and love interest, Molotov Cocktease, the daughter of the legendary KGB assassin and supervillain, Siberian Husky, whom we later would come to learn was killed by Brock
after you killed my partner.
You took my eye!
After you took my heart.
After a short embrace, the two would travel back to Brisbyland, where Brock would unbrainwash Hank and Dean and rescue Rusty. All the while, wait. Yeah, maybe let's just go with Molotov. All the while, Molotov takes the panda that Brisby had stole as we overhear a phone call between her and David Bowie as she tells him the mission is complete. Both Molotov and David Bowie would become major reoccurring characters down the line, so something to look forward to. But most of all, I mean, the concept of cloning and the fact that Jonas was trying to perfect it may arguably be one of the most important plot points throughout this entire story. And the fact that we're on, season 1, episode 4 is just ridiculous. I cannot stress going out and checking it out for yourself if you have not already. Season 1, episode 5 was titled Eeny, Meeny, Miny, Magic, and it was written by Doc Hammer. The episode originally aired on September 4th, 2004. In this episode, what was heavily implied in the previous episodes is confirmed, and that is that Rusty has been absolutely tanking the venture company in the years since his father's passing. To make ends meet, we see Rusty welcoming tenants to live on the venture compound. One such tenant is none other than Dr. Byron Orpheus, an expert in necromancy, along with his young daughter Triana, who Dean instantly takes a liking to. Immediately upon moving in, Orpheus senses something strange and dark coming from the compound. And of course, that's Rusty's doing, as we learn he's created a machine designed to show those who enter their greatest pleasures. But we also learn that Orpheus's senses are quite sharp, as Rusty would later admit to using an orphan's heart to power the machine. Like, good lord. While speaking more with Rusty, Orpheus shares that he too is a single parent, as Triana's mother left him for a younger necromancer. And we'll be meeting him later on. He's fun. Now, Brock would actually get trapped inside Rusty's dream machine whilst trying to protect the boys from getting trapped inside it. And the boys, being the boys, would enter the machine willingly after him. But Hank and Dean entered the machine wearing aluminum foil hats, therefore being protected from the machine's dark power. Upon entering, Brock is haunted with his deepest regrets, mainly being an accident where he accidentally killed a teammate of his in a college football game. Once Brock is able to find closure, he's then able to visualize his greatest desires, and that being combat and sleeping with Molotov Cocktease. Brock, Hank, and Dean are able to be rescued from the machine thanks to the help of Triana calling out to Dean. And in the end, Orpheus ends up vanishing the machine into thin air to prevent future disasters. Which I'm sure we can all agree is probably, for the best. And this episode was great because it not only introduced us to Dean's first love interest, Triana, we're also beginning to see the differences between the twins as characters. To be clear, Dean is much more sensitive and interested in his studies, while Hank is dumb. Very, very, very dumb. But he's got a big heart. Season 1, Episode 6 is titled The Ghost of the Sargasso, and it was written by Jackson Public and Doc Hammer. The episode originally aired on September 11, 2004. When the episode begins, we see a flashback of Rusty's father Jonas aboard his ship at sea, the X-2, alongside his crew of adventurers, aptly named Team Venture. In the flashback, we see the old Team Venture witnessing one of their members, Tom, crash land a jet into the ocean. Before plummeting to his death, Tom has words specifically for the Team Venture member Randy, better known as the Action Man.
I'm happy. Hope you're happy too.
He tells the crew to tell his wife that he loves her, and then he passes. Now this is relevant as we see Rusty in the current day taking that very same X-2 out to sea. Why, you ask? To find that very same experimental plane that his father built that Tom subsequently crashed into the sea. When Rusty dives in the water, however, a tracking device Rusty is using awakens the spirit of the long-since deceased pilot. Now while Rusty is submerged underwater, the X-2 is attacked by pirates who are looking to steal it. They manage to capture Brock momentarily, while Hank escapes. Dean, however, ends up becoming quite friendly with the pirate captain, who would actually become a reoccurring character himself. Dean would learn that the pirate was a captain of a ship that didn't actually move, hence why they're trying to take the X-2. Surprisingly enough, Hank is actually able to take out a handful of pirates following Brock's detailed instructions. As for Brock, he would escape on his own, killing 2 pirates by himself while handcuffed, using nothing but his butt. Yes, you heard me. Now Tom, the pilot spirit from the crashed plane, was also now on the X-2 and causing all sorts of havoc. And by that I mean just screaming very loudly. Hank calls Orpheus, and rightly so, I mean this is right up his alley. Orpheus puts Hank in touch with Tom's widow, who tries to speak to the spirit and calm it down. Unfortunately, this plan backfires when she's interrupted by her new husband, who is none other than Rodney, the Action Man, as he reminds Tom that he is in fact dead and he should go away. Before the situation can escalate further, Brock's heard enough, as he goes over and beats the hell out of the ghost, literally, and chucks Tom's spirit back into the ocean. Shortly after that, the pirate captain would ask for a ride home, and a beautiful friendship would be born. And this episode served as our first introduction to the original Team Venture, and a more formal introduction would come later, but they'll play a huge part throughout the series. Season 1, Episode 7 is titled Ice Station Impossible. The episode was written by Jackson Public and originally aired on September 18, 2004. As the episode begins, we see Rusty has applied for a job under the previously mentioned Richard Impossible, whose family is a full-on spoof of the Fantastic Four, Richard himself being an obvious imitation of Reed Richards, or Mr. Fantastic. Richard comes equipped with not only the abilities of Mr. Fantastic, but also the mind, as we learn he was also once Rusty's professor in college. Among Rusty in that college course was the albino computer scientist, Pete White. We see boy genius, Billy Quizboy Whalen, as we see they too have come seeking a position under Mr. Impossible. We are also introduced to Race Bannon, who ironically enough does exist within this universe, as the OSI agent falls out of the sky to his death landing within the Venture compound. When Brock finds Race, in his final breath, Race tells Brock that he was on his way to retrieve a vial that contained the Goliath serum, a serum created by Mr. Impossible for military use. The serum, once consumed by an organism, then transforms said organism into a walking grenade. After passing, everything was going fine until some of said serum ends up getting on Hank, and Brock then needed to figure out how to stop Hank from exploding. Back at Impossible Industries, Rusty finds out the hard way why you should look into a job's requirements before applying, and by that I mean all applicants were required to submit a urine sample, which of course is a problem because of Rusty's drug habits. Before he runs out of options, however, Sally Impossible, Richard's wife, and an obvious Mrs. Fantastic spoof, offers to submit a sample for Rusty, as she's clearly taking a liking to him. Sally tells Rusty about her brother Cody, who, yes, if you're keeping up, is the Human Torch, except he's usually unconscious because of the pain from, well, being on fire all the time. Also, her mentally handicapped cousin Ned, who is a spoof of the Thing, whose rock-like skin also keeps him in constant pain. I mean, hell, even Sally's invisibility isn't quite like the Marvel counterpart. Sally has the ability to turn her skin invisible, which really just reveals her internal organs, which is, absolutely disgusting to Rusty. Sally explains that their deformities were a result of an explosion caused by one of Richard's experiments, and he was the only one who escaped unharmed. However, when Richard discovers Rusty knows all this, he decides to fly him out to the middle of the Arctic and leave him there to die. Fortunately, both conflicts are resolved when Brock brings Hank to Mr. Impossible because he's the only person that can cure him, only to find out that the serum has no effect whatsoever on humans. All the while, Rusty is rescued from a cold death, and Cody and Ned turn on Mr. Impossible, and Sally declares that she's leaving with Rusty, I mean, only for Rusty to leave her there, because again, he is very disgusted by the whole no skin thing. In this episode, the OSI made its first official appearance, and would remain a driving force in the story throughout. The entire Impossible family would be reoccurring again and again throughout as well. Moving right on, Season 1, Episode 8 was written by both Jackson Publick and Doc Hammer, and is titled Midlife Chrysalis. The episode originally aired on September 25th, 2004. Now at the start of this episode, we get to see just how much Brock's license to kill means to him, as he finds out it's expired when flashing his badge at an officer. Lost without his murder ticket, Hank and Dean now set out to help Brock study and train for his upcoming exam. That being said, the title gets its name from Rusty, who is feeling even more insecure than normal, as he goes out to meet some women. To his surprise, he actually does find a lady to bring home. And to none of ours, that lady is actually Dr. Girlfriend in disguise. Now Brock does try to warn him, but of course, Rusty is Rusty, and he brings her home anyway. Once there, Dr. Girlfriend seduces Rusty and injects him with the serum that transforms him into a caterpillar, to which Rusty, who still doesn't realize who she is, believes he did to himself. Back to our favorite massive murder machine. When Brock finally takes his exam for the OSI, he fails almost everything aside from the physical exam. Luckily for him, his exam was administered by the son of a General Traister, who spoke of Brock as a god, and conveniently Brock used to babysit him as a child, so Traister's son decides to reinstate Brock's license all the same. Dr. Girlfriend, on the other hand, has been dealing with an insecure monarch who thinks she has feelings for Rusty, which of course is made worse when she begins to feel guilty about turning him into a caterpillar. So guilty, in fact, that she would actually return and later inject Rusty with the cure. Classic Rusty. Throughout the episode, we learn not only more about the OSI, but also more about Rusty and the Monarch, mainly that the two have quite a bit in common, something Dr. Girlfriend herself points out throughout the duration of the episode. If only she knew. If only she knew. Season 1, Episode 9 was written by Doc Hammer, and is titled, Are You There, God? It's Me, Dean. The episode originally aired on October 2nd, 2004. When it opens, we find that Team Venture is tied up and being threatened by the Monarch. The Monarch threatens to release them into the water below to be attacked by the dreaded Candiru, a fish that swims up people's urethras, devouring the flesh it comes across. Before he can go through with this torture, however, it is brought to a halt when Dean begins to suffer from testicular torsion, a condition when one's testicles wrap around one another in an incredibly painful knot. During this, Rusty cites a law from the Guild of Calamitous Intent that calls for a brief intermission while Dean's condition is taken care of. Fun facts for you. A, testicular torsion is a very, very real thing. And B, Doc Hammer himself actually went through this. So he's speaking from full-on experience here. When he wrote this episode, this was life experience. Anyways, during the intermission, Rusty would take Dean for help from Pete White and Billy Quizboy, who successfully untangle his nuts. I mean, to be specific, Billy untangles his nuts. All the while, the Monarch took Brock and Hank back to his hive as collateral until the return from intermission. On the way there, the Monarch mentions Rusty knew so much about this guild law because it was in fact put in place for him when he was a child adventurer under his father Jonas. And though we don't learn much at this point, I should explain, the Guild of Calamitous Intent, or the Guild for short, is the villain organization that the Monarch and many of the villains in this story are licensed under. While back at the hive, Hank and Brock come to the realization that the Monarch has quite literally nothing else to do besides arch Dr. Venture, who again, doesn't even really know that he's his nemesis. Though the Monarch would have them believe he has his hands in many sinister soups, he does not. And Brock, feeling sorry for the Monarch, decides to attack his minions just for the hell of it, just to give him something to do. Once Dean is untangled, Rusty reaches out to the Monarch, and the episode ends where it began. And just before being fed to the dreaded Candiru, Hank now screams out in pain, because Hank is now suffering from testicular torsion. And outside of a very informative episode on testicular torsion, which again is a very real thing, this episode did serve as our first formal introduction to the Guild of Calamitous Intent. And I just think the whole idea is great. I mean, it really goes into the world-building aspect of the show that we'll get into more, but great. It's awesome. Season 1, Episode 10 was also written by Doc Hammer, and it's titled Tag Sale You're It. The episode originally aired on October 9th, 2004. Now, do you remember when I said Rusty was tanking his father's company? Well, that persists in this episode, as we see he's having a yard sale selling all sorts of tech just to make ends meet. Now, this tech consists of mostly Jonas's old gadgets that Rusty no longer has a use for, but also some of Hank and Dean's stuff as well scattered amongst. Of course, Rusty hasn't considered the kind of buyers that would come to a yard sale with super dangerous high-tech machinery. And to no one's surprise, we see a whole slew of villains come to partake. But luckily, Brock alerted the OSI, and backup is sent to provide security during the sale. Also, much like in the previous episode, there is a guild law that's in place to prevent any attacks during such a sale. The Mighty Monarch and Dr. Girlfriend are also in attendance, and while Dr. Girlfriend is alone, she is confronted by Phantom Limb, an old associate of hers, who sports invisible electric arms and legs, hence the name Phantom Limb. He tries to convince her to leave the Monarch, but she refuses, insisting she's happy, though when the Monarch returns, she does lie to him about knowing who he is. All the same, the Monarch is now ready to go forth with his real plan, sneaking into the Venture compound. Now, once inside the lab at the Venture compound, however, we see the Monarch discovers that Rusty's lab is far too depressing to be made any worse than it already is, and instead of doing any arching, he decides to just settle for a fancy exit. Now, this episode serves as our first introduction to Phantom Limb, who would become a prominent character in the episodes to come. We also begin to learn a little bit more about Dr. Girlfriend, who he clearly has feelings for, but we'll get more on that later as well. But another thing I just wanted to point out is, one thing you're starting to see is how closely knit the villains are under the umbrella of the Guild of Calamitous Intent. Now, Season 1, Episode 11 is titled Past Tense, and was written by Jackson Public. The episode originally aired on October 16, 2004. When it starts, we see that Team Venture is attending a funeral of one of Rusty's old college friends, Mike Soriyama, at which point we learn Rusty not only went to college with Pete White and Werner Unterbite, he also was roommates with Brock for a brief time. I mean, as Rusty put it, they didn't really see each other much in those days. I mean, hell, even the Monarch went to their college. It was poppin'. While carrying the coffin at the funeral, Rusty, Brock, Pete, and Werner are all kidnapped by what turns out to be a robot coffin. Once in captivity, we learn that Soriyama faked his own death and staged his funeral as a ruse just to get them all in one place. And through a pre-recorded video, we learn that Soriyama plans to kill them for each individually ruining his chances with a girl he had a crush on in college, Leslie Cohen. Now, none of the reasons were really justified, but some were better than others. I mean, like Brock beating him up and sleeping with her. I mean, some were just outright stupid, like Rusty having sex with Leslie Cohen in an imaginary game of Dungeons and Dragons. I mean, I don't know if that is justifiable, but either way. Brock ends up escaping captivity using Unterbite's jaw, while Hank and Dean enlist the help of the old Team Venture to rescue the others. Now, the original Team Venture consists of the previously mentioned Randy the Action Man, and now we're introduced to the super strong Kano, the smooth-talking, suave Colonel Gentleman, and the exiled son of Atlantis, Otto Aquarius. And we also learn that Jonas put a tracking device in Rusty's tooth that he found and removed in college. At any rate, old Team Venture does in fact find where Soriyama took everyone. Unfortunately, upon arriving, they are mistaken for enemies by Brock Sampson and, well, yeah, they get beat up accordingly. Now once reunited, Team Venture discovers Soriyama's actual coffin, and they do find a deceased Soriyama inside, confirming he did in fact die. Not thinking much of it, the crew leaves, forgetting Pete and Werner, who are still in chains. Damn. Now, Season 1, Episode 12 might be my favorite of the season. It's definitely a toss-up. Is titled The Trial of the Monarch, and was written by Doc Hammer. The episode originally aired on October 23, 2004. When the episode opens, we learn that the Mighty Monarch is being tried for the murder of a police officer. The Monarch would proclaim his innocence, and is being represented by Tiny Attorney, a deformed man that's growing on the stomach of an inbred simpleton. Their words, not mine, their words, not mine, who specializes in representing villains in court. The Monarch is the first witness to take the stand, as he recounts a story of how he and Dr. Girlfriend got in a huge fight that ended up with him kicking her out. Upon leaving, she would end up going to Phantom Limb for comfort, which angered the Monarch even more. Phantom Limb and Dr. Girlfriend are both in the courtroom in attendance. Disguised, I guess, if you want to call it that, but, I think the only person that didn't realize they were there was the Monarch. Now, Orpheus, the Necromancer, is actually called to the stand soon after, as he has the ability to read the Monarch's mind and find the truth. When doing so, he actually finds that the Monarch is innocent, like he said he was. But before he can reveal this to the rest of the courtroom, agents from the Guild burst in with freeze rays, freezing everyone in the court. At this point, it's revealed that the real motive behind framing the Monarch was to get Tiny Attorney out in the open, as Tiny Attorney is number 3 on the Guild's most wanted list. While everybody's frozen, Guild agents take Tiny Attorney, and before everyone thaws, they decide to hypnotize Orpheus. Well, to be fair, they decide to hypnotically suggest things to Orpheus. Phantom Limb hypnotically suggests that Orpheus convict the Monarch for the crime, while Dr. Girlfriend suggests that he convinced the Monarch that she had nothing to do with it. The hypnotic suggestion is successful on both ends, and the Monarch is in fact found guilty and arrested. In this episode, we really start to see the culmination of the world building that's taken place so far, and we also get to learn a little bit more about the Guild, as we hear 2 agents from the organization taking orders from someone they call the Sovereign. Though they're villains, they have rules and codes. As Brock puts it, they're the only organization he still respects. In the final episode of Season 1, Episode 13, is called Return to Spider Skull Island, and was written by both Jackson Public and Doc Hammer. The episode originally aired on October 30th, 2004. As the finale begins, we see Rusty is suffering from a tumor on his stomach. The placement of the tumor causes Hank and Dean to think that Rusty is pregnant, so they go to stay with Orpheus while Brock takes him to the hospital. Once there, a surgeon is able to remove the tumor, only to find out it wasn't really a tumor at all, as the removed flesh comes to life and steals the X1. When Rusty and Brock finally make it back to the compound, they are ambushed by what is actually Rusty's twin brother he ate in the womb. Outraged for having his whole life taken away from him before it started, he creates a robotic suit out of household items and tries to kill Rusty. And while all that fun is happening, the boys leave Orpheus's house and manage to get arrested for speeding on their hover scooters. And by speeding on their hover scooters, I do mean going 15 in a 65. Now back at the compound, Brock is able to knock the tumor baby out of his robot suit, and just before he's able to kill him, Rusty begs Brock to spare his brother's life. His brother, however, who is now going by Jonas Venture Jr., is still upset with Rusty, at which point Rusty gifts JJ the Venture compound on Spider Skull Island and the X2. Orpheus would later bail Hank and Dean out of jail, and while riding their hover scooters home, they are spotted by the Monarch's most prominent henchmen, Henchman number 21 and Henchman number 24. The henchmen mistake a cannon for their standard issue dart gun and accidentally shoot and kill both Hank and Dean. Well, for now, as we see in the post-credit scene that Rusty's looking over his deceased children, then tells Brock to get the clones. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is where Season 1 of the Venture Brothers comes to a close. Now, personally, I've certainly watched through the entirety of the Venture Brothers a multitude of times, but honestly, diving into the contents of each episode for this video, it really still amazes me how much solid concrete plot elements, of the series were set up this early on. I mean, the Venture Brothers is truly a masterclass on world building and character writing, and I absolutely adore it. I think you would too if you haven't seen it. I mean, honestly, if you've never seen an episode, I really hope this video encourages you to do so. I mean, I promise you will not regret it. But other than that, if you've enjoyed the video, if you're enjoying this series, please get in the comments and let me know. I mean, I enjoyed doing this very, very much, and I'd love to continue going and finish up the series. But just let me know. As always, guys, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.
I'll take it. I don't need a bag. I'm going to wear this home.